I stared at the screen, and for a moment the words didn't even make sense. Ryan, her boyfriend, the one I had explicitly told them was not invited, was taking my place on the $15,500 ski trip I had planned, booked, and paid for. Every detail, every thoughtful touch, every ounce of my time and care erased in an instant. Shock hit me first, then a cold, simmering clarity. Where are you watching from right now? And what time is it for you? I need to know how far this story will reach. The kitchen was alive with quiet activity long before the sun had risen. At 4 a.m., Matilda moved with precision, slicing artisanal cheddar into perfect squares and folding prosciutto into neat rows for the road trip sandwiches. 4 thermoses brimmed with hot cocoa, their lids secured with meticulous care, while she mentally ran through the tire pressure on the rented SUV and the perfectly balanced luggage in the driveway. 3 hours of sleep and a jittery caffeine buzz were all she had, but her mind was already 5 steps ahead, orchestrating every detail. She was exhausted, yet every movement carried a sense of purpose, curating the day for everyone else. Matilda had spent years believing that if she managed the household flawlessly, if she anticipated needs and smoothed out every wrinkle in their lives, her family would finally recognize her as essential. Yet as she looked at her cold, cracked hands worn raw from the relentless work and winter air, the truth settled in. She was not being a daughter. She was staff. Each sandwich, each packed thermos, each carefully weighed bag was an act of service, not of love received. It was a reality she had been conditioned to accept from a young age. Her parents, Douglas and Cynthia, had trained her to equate worth with utility. When she was 7, she had been praised for being low maintenance. By 12, she was lauded for stepping in as the adult when her sister Victoria threw tantrums that drained the house of energy. Every act of compliance, every moment of self-effacement had been quietly reinforced, teaching her that her needs were secondary, that love and approval were conditional on usefulness. This early programming, this normalized cruelty, had shaped her into someone who instinctively prioritized others over herself, even at the cost of her own well-being. That cold morning, buttering bread for people who wouldn't even wake to thank her. Matilda finally saw it for what it was, a lifetime of being trained to serve, to anticipate, to sacrifice all while her own desires, comfort, and recognition were quietly ignored. She was exhausted, yes, but this exhaustion was layered with a deeper realization of how her entire life had been quietly, systematically structured around the comfort of others. The text blinked on her phone, simple and devastating. Ryan needed the seat. Matilda stared, unable at first to process the words. Ryan, the boyfriend who had never held a job for longer than 6 weeks. The one she had explicitly said was not invited, was taking her place on the trip she had spent 5 years saving for. The $15,500, the planning, the hours of meticulous preparation, all reduced to nothing. At first, shock and a bitter sting of betrayal made her chest tighten, a hot wave of disbelief that threatened to pull tears from the corners of her eyes. But then, as the initial sting faded, a cold clarity set in. She had been trained for this. Her parents had spent decades teaching her that her value was transactional, that usefulness was the measure of love. She had lived her life anticipating needs, smoothing jagged edges, sacrificing herself in quiet, invisible ways. And now, in one succinct, cruel message, the truth of that lesson had arrived in full force. Matilda felt no tears. She felt resolve. The betrayal crystallized into data points, patterns, and consequences. This wasn't just a vacation reassignment. This was a statement, a calculation by her family about her worth. They had decided she was optional, that months of her planning and her very presence were less valuable than the comfort of a man who had contributed nothing. Every muscle in her body tightened, not with rage, but with focus. She could chart the situation like a spreadsheet in her mind: inputs, dependencies, vulnerabilities. Where others might have sobbed or called for explanations, Matilda saw options, systems to manipulate, leverage to exert. The emotional chaos that had once ruled her decisions was replaced with precision, strategy, and quiet power. This text was no longer an insult, it was a trigger. It signaled that the game she had been conditioned to play her entire life, the one in which love and recognition were earned through service, was finally over. Her role as a passive participant was finished. With each passing second, the feeling of helplessness ebbed, leaving a focused awareness she was about to act. And when she did, the consequences would be unmistakable. The seat was gone, yes, but what came next would not be hers to lose. It would be theirs to reckon with. Matilda sank into the familiar leather chair of her home office, the quiet hum of her triple monitor setup filling the room. She opened the spreadsheet she had painstakingly built over years, each tab a ledger of household expenses, contributions, and obligations. Rows of black and red numbers stretched across the screen, mapping out a decade of invisible labor she had quietly shouldered. Every mortgage payment, every property tax, every insurance premium, every utility bill that had allowed her family to live in comfort was meticulously logged. The $15,500 Aspen trip, which had now been hijacked by Ryan, was not an isolated expense. It was merely the latest item in a long, unbroken chain of financial oversight and personal sacrifice. She scrolled through the recurring monthly costs, noting how much of the house they inhabited depended solely on her. Her father's credit had failed years ago, yet the mortgage was hers. Her mother's lifestyle, the endless streaming services, the cellular plans, even the vehicle insurance for the SUV her family now drove, had been funded and managed by her. She had coordinated, authorized, and paid for every essential service that kept the household operational. Every detail of their comfort, every minor convenience had been silently underwritten by her labor and foresight. As she studied the ledger, a stark realization settled in. They were not simply ungrateful. They were entirely reliant on her, oblivious to the fact that the infrastructure they took for granted was controlled entirely by the very person they now tried to discard. Her meticulous record-keeping had transformed years of invisible effort into data revealing the full scope of their dependence. The spreadsheet was not just numbers. It was a map of power, control, and accountability. They had treated her as optional, but here, in this quiet office, Matilda understood that she was anything but. She was the administrator of every thread holding the household together, the linchpin, without which their comfortable existence would collapse. Her hands hovered over the keyboard as she traced through every account, confirming what she already knew. They had underestimated the reach of her control. Every service, every subscriptions, every line item that facilitated their daily lives could be paused, restricted, or revoked with a few deliberate actions. The $15,500 trip was a spark. Yes, but the forest of her oversight stretched far beyond that. Years of careful documentation had given her the lens to see the pattern clearly: a family who relied entirely on her generosity and discipline, yet treated her as expendable. And now, with clarity, she could see the power that lay in her hands. She had all the pieces, they had none of the awareness. This was more than accounting, it was leverage. For the first time, the quiet, methodical work that had been invisible for so long could be translated into action that would reshape the rules entirely. Matilda picked up her phone and dialed the ski resort, her voice steady and measured as the line connected. "Good morning, Marcus. We're eagerly awaiting my family's arrival. There's been a change of plans," she said, careful to maintain calm professionalism. She didn't flinch, didn't explain the years of planning the sandwiches, the cold mornings, or the betrayal. She only stated facts: the credit card on file was being used without authorization. She flagged the transaction as fraudulent, giving clear instructions for cancellation. Marcus, the concierge she had coordinated with for weeks, shifted from friendly to cautious, immediately complying. Step 1 was complete. Her family's luxury escape was suddenly impossible, but Matilda wasn't finished. She set the phone down, eyes shifting to the smart home dashboard on her tablet. Usually a tool for comfort, it was now an instrument of control. The thermostat, once set to a cozy 72 degrees, slid steadily downward. 40 degrees, just above freezing enough to chill the house without breaking the pipes. Mirroring the icy precision in her mind. Then came connectivity. She accessed the router, scanned the list of connected devices. Her father's iPad, her mother's phone, Victoria's laptop, and blocked them all, resetting the master password. The accounts they relied on the internet access, they assumed permanent, were instantly hers to manipulate. Every streaming service, every subscription, every device fell under her calculated authority. Finally, the smart locks. Engaging lockdown mode, she disabled all user codes except her master access. The doors were hers alone. Any attempt to enter would require her presence or ingenuity beyond their expectation. For the first time, the house was a fortress in her control, a tangible reflection of the ledger she had spent years building. She stepped back, letting her hands relax around her coffee cup, warmth radiating through her fingers, contrasting with the deliberate chill she had created. This was a quiet kind of power, clinical and complete. Each degree the temperature dropped, each denied device, each locked door was a measured consequence, a direct response to the casual disregard they had shown her, to the texts that had displaced her seat, to the years of invisible labor they had taken for granted. Matilda was no longer operating on hope or emotion. She was executing a precise protocol. She was leveraging infrastructure, finance, and technology in tandem, turning their assumptions of entitlement into immediate, unavoidable reality. For the first time, the chaos of Christmas morning, the betrayal, and the unfairness of their behavior were not external pressures. They were data points she could manipulate. The house, the network, the locks, the temperature all became a mirror of her control, a warning every comfort they had relied on could vanish in an instant. And she held the keys. Hours later, the rented SUV skidded into the driveway, its tires crunching on ice that Matilda hadn't bothered to salt. The family tumbled out, faces pale with cold and disbelief, shivering in designer coats that offered no real protection. Her mother clutched her phone, already dialing frantically, while Victoria leaned on Ryan, staring at the locked front door as though it were a puzzle she could solve with sheer will. But it was her father, Douglas, who drew Matilda's attention. He marched straight to the garage keypad, punching in his code with growing desperation. Beep, 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 denied. Repeated attempts, harder presses, frustrated kicks against the metal, all futile. He circled the house, crowbar in hand, ready to force entry through the one remaining lock she hadn't digitized. The pounding resonated through the floorboards, a chaotic percussion that drew the neighbors out of their homes. Porch lights flicked on and eyes widened at the scene unfolding. Douglas, realizing there was an audience, instantly shifted his performance. The crowbar dropped and a panicked plea escaped his lips. "Please call 911. My daughter's having a psychotic break and my heart medication is inside." The neighbor's sympathy replaced suspicion, the display crafted to frame her as unstable. Matilda remained composed, a cup of tea in hand, observing the spectacle with quiet certainty. When the police arrived, she handed over a notarized affidavit proving Douglas's non-residency. Under oath, he had declared months earlier that he was only a guest, qualifying for tax purposes. The officer read it carefully, eyes flicking between the papers and Douglas. Either he admitted residency, which meant fraud, or denied it and had no legal right to enter. Douglas faltered, his carefully constructed narrative crumbling. The attempted breach of her property was clear, and the officer acted swiftly, cuffing him for attempted burglary and property damage. Meanwhile, her mother and siblings watched silently from the SUV, their arrogance dissolved into panic before they fled the scene. The lights that had illuminated her father's performance blinked out, leaving the house quiet and resolute. Matilda, unshaken, surveyed her home, the smart locks, the now regulated environment, and the reaffirmed boundaries she had imposed. She had not acted out of petty revenge or emotional vindictiveness. Every measure, every call, every affidavit, and every lock was a demonstration of law, order, and the consequences of fraudulent behavior. In that moment, the house felt like hers again, not just as property, but as a space governed by clarity, rules, and a reinforced respect for the boundaries she had set. She deleted the family group chat, listed their furniture for free, and let the cold, purposeful air wash through the rooms. Blood isn't a contract. Family is behavior. And Matilda had just rewritten the rules. With her home reclaimed and her family removed, Matilda finally felt the weight lift. Every lock, every controlled device, every decision had reinforced a simple truth: boundaries define respect and behavior has consequences. She had turned betrayal into clarity, chaos into order, and entitlement into accountability. The house was hers, not just physically, but as a statement of control and empowerment. If stories of reclaiming power and standing firm resonate with you, make sure to like and subscribe. There are more journeys of strength and strategy waiting to be shared.